CEO didn't touch his virgin wife for 3 years, but when she demanded a divorce, he begged for one last night. Hi, my dearest and most cherished family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. From the depths of my heart, thank you for simply being here. You are not just followers, you're a part of my soul's journey. I feel your love in every quiet view and your absence in every missing comment. Your voice matters here. You matter. To my new family, welcome home. This is a place where stories hold healing, where your heart will always be heard. And to those who've been with me since the beginning, you are my foundation, my courage. But why do I feel you fading? Don't make me ask for the love we once shared so freely. Let me send you a little prayer today. May your nights be gentle. May your heart stay whole. May kindness follow your footsteps, and may you always feel seen, heard, and loved. If you still walk with me, please don't stay silent. Write, "I am with you," in the comments, and let your love be seen again. Your support is my strength. Now, close your eyes, breathe with me, and let's begin today's story with a heart full of love. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Bounce estate as Richard adjusted his black bow tie one final time. Tonight was his wedding night, yet his hands trembled not with anticipation, but with the weight of what he was about to shatter. Decca Whedon, soon to be Decca Bounce, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bridal suite, still wearing her stunning ivory wedding gown. The moonlight painted her ebony skin with an ethereal glow, transforming her into something divine. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, adorned with pearls that caught the light with every subtle movement. She was breathtaking, and Richard's chest tightened with the knowledge that he would never allow himself to touch her. The ceremony was beautiful, Decca said softly, not turning from the window. Her voice carried a note of uncertainty that made Richard's stomach clench. Your vows, they sounded so genuine. Richard closed his eyes briefly, remembering the words he'd spoken before 300 guests. Words about love, devotion, and forever that felt like broken glass in his throat because they could never be true. Not for him. Not when he carried the poison of his father's legacy in his veins. "Decca," he began, his voice rougher than intended. "We need to talk." She turned then, and Richard felt his breath catch. Her dark eyes sparkled with unshed tears. But there was hope there too. Hope he was about to crush. Her full lips curved into a tentative smile that made his heart race despite his resolve. "I know this marriage started as a business arrangement," she said, taking a step toward him. The silk of her dress rustled like whispered promises. "But Richard, today felt like something more. The way you looked at me during the ceremony, the way you held my hand." "Stop!" The word came out harsher than he intended, and he saw her flinch. Richard forced himself to maintain distance, even as every fiber of his being screamed to close the space between them. "What you felt today was an illusion, a performance for our families and the media." Decca's face crumpled slightly, but she lifted her chin with the dignity that had first drawn him to her. "I don't understand." Richard turned away, unable to bear the hurt in her eyes. Through the window, he could see the gardens where they'd taken their wedding photos just hours ago, where she'd laughed at something Dante had said, where she'd looked at Richard like he might actually deserve love. 3 years, he said, his voice hollow. "That's what our contract stipulates. 3 years to stabilize both companies, to satisfy our family's merger requirements. After that, you'll be free to divorce me and find someone who can give you what you deserve." "And what do you think I deserve?" Her voice remained steady, but he could hear the tears she was fighting. Richard's hands clenched into fists. "Love. Passion. A man who won't destroy you with his darkness." "Richard, what are you talking about?" Decca moved closer, and he could smell her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, intoxicating and pure. "You're not making sense." He whirled around, and the anguish in his grey eyes made her gasp. "My father was a monster, Decca. He destroyed my mother with his obsession, his possessiveness, his need to control everything beautiful in his life. She was radiant when they married, just like you are now. By the time she abandoned me when I was 8, she was a shadow of herself, broken, terrified, empty." "You're not your father," Decca whispered, reaching out tentatively. Richard stepped back as if her touch would burn him. "How can you be so certain?" "The Bance men are cursed, Decca. We take beautiful things and twist them until they're unrecognizable. I won't do that to you. I won't become him." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and Richard felt each one like a knife to his heart. "So what are you saying? That we'll live as strangers? That you'll never touch me, never hold me, never?" "Never," he confirmed, the word tasting like ashes. "You'll have your own wing of the house, your own life. I'll support your fashion design dreams, give you everything you need to build your career. But we'll never be husband and wife in any way that matters." Decca wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile in her wedding gown. "And if I refuse? If I demand my rights as your wife?" Richard's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "Then you'll learn what kind of monster I really am." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shattered dreams. Finally, Decca straightened her shoulders, and Richard was amazed by her strength, even in this moment of devastation. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's what you want, Richard. But I have conditions." He nodded, not trusting his voice. "I want to pursue my fashion design business without interference. I want to do charity work, to have friends, to live my life as I see fit. And I want respect from you, from your staff, from everyone who needs to believe this marriage is real." "Done," Richard agreed immediately. "Anything you need." And Richard. Her voice was stronger now, though her eyes still glistened with tears. "If you change your mind, if you decide you want a real marriage, you'll have to prove to me that you're worthy of it, because despite what you think, I'm not some fragile flower that will wilt at the first sign of passion. I'm stronger than your mother was, and I deserve better than a man who's too afraid to fight for love." With that, she moved toward the door, her wedding gown trailing behind her like fallen dreams. At the threshold, she paused without looking. "Back. The guest room in the East Wing will suffice," she said quietly. "I assume you've already made arrangements for separate quarters." Richard's throat felt raw. "The entire East Wing is yours. I'll have your belongings moved tomorrow." She nodded and disappeared into the hallway, leaving Richard alone with the ghost of jasmine and vanilla and the knowledge that he'd just destroyed the most precious thing that had ever entered his life. He sank into the leather chair by the fireplace, his head in his hands. Through the walls, he could hear the soft sound of Decca crying, and each sob felt like a death knell for the man he might have been if he'd possessed the courage to love her. But Richard Bance was not courageous. He was a coward who would rather live in lonely misery than risk becoming the monster his father had been. As he sat in his wedding suit in an empty room that should have been filled with love and passion, he made himself a promise. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how desperately he longed for her, he would keep Decca safe from the darkness that lived inside him, even if it destroyed them both. Chapter 2. Living Like Strangers. 3 years later, the morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of Decca's design studio, illuminating sketches scattered across her mahogany desk. 3 years had passed since that devastating wedding night, 3 years of living as elegant strangers in the same house. She held up a flowing evening gown design, studying the way light played across the penciled fabric. The dress was bold, sensual, everything she couldn't express in her own life. Mrs. Bance. Ophelia Cross appeared in the doorway, her tablet clutched against her chest. Richard's assistant had become Decca's lifeline over the years, one of the few people who treated her with genuine warmth in this cold mansion. "Mr. Bance asked me to inform you that the car will be ready at 6 for the charity gala tonight." Decca set down her sketch and smiled. "Thank you, Ophelia. And please, how many times must I ask you to call me Decca?" Ophelia's eyes softened. "Old habits, I suppose. He's very particular about maintaining proper appearances." Even his assistant couldn't bring herself to use Richard's name around Decca, as if speaking it might somehow shatter the careful facade they'd all constructed. 3 years of this elaborate dance, 3 years of polite distance and measured choreography. "How is he today?" Decca found herself asking, as she did most mornings. She hated how much she craved the answer. "Exhausted," Ophelia admitted, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "He's been working 18-hour days." Again, Dante's concerned about him. Decca's chest tightened. She'd noticed the exhaustion in Richard's grey eyes during their brief encounters, passing in the hallway, sharing uncomfortable breakfasts when business associates visited, standing side by side at social events where they played the perfect couple. "Maybe you could suggest he take a vacation," she offered, knowing it was futile. Ophelia shook her head. "You know he won't listen to me. The only person whose opinion he might consider is—" She stopped herself, but they both knew how that sentence ended. "Is yours." After Ophelia left, Decca returned to her sketches, but her mind wandered to the previous week's incident. She'd been in the library, researching fashion history for her upcoming collection, when she'd heard piano music drifting from the music room. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, hauntingly beautiful and melancholy. She'd discovered Richard at the grand piano, his usually immaculate hair disheveled, his tie abandoned, playing with a passion that stole her breath. His eyes had been closed, his face a canvas of pain and longing that made her heart ache. She'd stood transfixed in the doorway, watching this man she'd married but never truly known reveal his soul through music. When he'd finally noticed her, the shutters had slammed closed over his expression, his hands freezing on the keys. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," he'd said quietly, but he'd risen and walked away, leaving her alone with the ghost of that exquisite melody. Now 3 days later, she still couldn't get the image out of her mind. Richard, vulnerable and raw, pouring his heart into music because he couldn't pour it into anything else. "Knock, knock." Tempest Blake's voice broke through her reverie. Her best friend and business partner swept into the studio, her arms full of fabric samples. "Time to make you gorgeous for tonight's torture session." Decca laughed despite herself. "It's a charity gala, not an execution. With your husband, what's the difference?" Tempest set down the fabrics and fixed Decca with a knowing look. "You know, most women whose husbands buy them entire fashion lines don't look quite so miserable about it." Heat flooded Decca's cheeks. Last month she'd discovered that Richard had been secretly investing in her business, arranging celebrity endorsements, even convincing Serafina Moon to wear one of her designs to the Met Gala. When she'd confronted him about it, he'd simply said it was good business sense. "He's fulfilling his end of our arrangement," Decca said carefully. "Bullshit." Tempest perched on the edge of the desk. "That man is desperately in love with you, Dee. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching? Like you're water in the desert and he's dying of thirst." Decca's heart skipped, but she forced herself to remain composed. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" "Then explain why he knows your coffee preferences better than you do. Explain why he's memorized your schedule so perfectly that you never actually encounter each other except at planned events. Explain why every business deal he makes somehow benefits your career." "Tempest," or explain, her friend continued relentlessly, "why Augustus Vale tried to poach you for his company last week, and within 24 hours His biggest investor pulled out, leaving him scrambling to save his own firm. Decker's eyes widened. Richard did that? Who else has that kind of power and that kind of motivation to protect you? Before Decker could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. She looked up to find Richard himself in the doorway, and her breath caught. He wore a charcoal grey suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair perfectly styled. But those grey eyes, they held the same exhaustion Ophelia had mentioned. "I apologize for interrupting," he said formally, though his gaze lingered on Decker's face. "I wanted to discuss tonight's arrangements." Tempest gathered her things quickly. "I'll go prepare your gown," she murmured to Decker, squeezing her hand before slipping past Richard. Alone with her husband, Decker felt the familiar tension crackle between them. 3 years, and he still affected her like this, making her pulse race, her skin feel too tight, her body yearn for touches that would never come. "You look radiant today," Richard said quietly, and the compliment felt like a physical caress. "Thank you." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture she'd never quite conquered around him. "Ophelia mentioned you've been working. Excessive hours again." Something flickered in his eyes, surprised perhaps that she'd inquired. "The Tokyo merger requires attention. When did you last sleep more than 4 hours? The question escaped before she could stop it, too intimate for their careful boundaries. Richard's jaw tensed. "I sleep adequately." Liar. The word was soft, affectionate, and it seemed to hit him like a physical blow. "You have shadows under your eyes, your hands tremble slightly when you're exhausted, and your left shoulder tenses when you're stressed. It's doing it right now." He stared at her in shock, as if amazed that she'd noticed such details about him, which was ridiculous. She'd been studying him for 3 years, memorizing every expression, every gesture, every tiny indication of his moods. "Decker," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair and destroying its perfect styling. The gesture made him look younger, more vulnerable. "What is it?" she asked gently. For a moment she thought he might actually tell her something real, something true. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her knees weak, and she saw longing there so deep it took her breath away. But then the mask slipped back into place, and he straightened his shoulders. "The car will be ready at 6, he said formally. "Wear the sapphire necklace. It matches your gown." As he turned to leave, Decker called after him, "Richard?" He paused without turning around. "The man who plays Chopin like his heart is breaking. That's who you really are. Not this cold stranger you pretend to be." His shoulders went rigid, and for a long moment, neither of them breathed. Then he walked away without a word, leaving Decker alone with the scent of his cologne and the certainty that beneath his icy exterior, Richard Bance was burning alive, just like she was. Chapter 3. The Divorce Papers. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight as Decker descended the marble staircase, her heels clicking against each step like a countdown to freedom. In her hands, she carried the manila envelope that would end 3 years of exquisite torture, 3 years of loving a man who refused to love her back. Richard stood in his study, silhouetted against the massive windows that overlooked the garden. Still in his tuxedo from the charity gala, he'd loosened his bow tie, and his dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. The sight of him made her chest constrict with familiar pain. Tonight had been the final straw. They danced, one obligatory dance for the photographers, and for those 3 minutes held in his arms, she'd felt like his genuine wife. The way he'd looked down at her, the way his hand had trembled against her waist, the way his breath had caught when she'd smiled up at him. It had been pure magic, until the music ended, and he'd stepped away so quickly you'd think she'd scorched him. "Richard." Her voice was steady, despite the storm raging inside her chest. He turned, and even in the dim light, she could see the exhaustion etched into his handsome features. At 35, he was more devastatingly attractive than ever, but the loneliness had carved deep lines around his grey eyes. "Decker, you should be sleeping." His voice was rough, intimate in the darkness. "So should you." She moved closer, noting the half-empty tumbler of whiskey on his desk, the scattered papers that suggested he'd been working even after they'd returned from the gala. "But I suppose neither of us is very good at doing what we should." Richard's gaze dropped to the envelope in her hands, and she saw his entire body go rigid. "What's that?" Her throat felt tight, but she'd rehearsed these words for weeks. 3 years, Richard. That was our agreement. 3 years to stabilize the companies, to satisfy our family's requirements. Well, both Bance Industries and Whedon Enterprises are thriving. The merger was a success. Our obligation to each other is complete. Decker, these are divorce papers." She held out the envelope, her hand remarkably steady. "I've already signed them. All they need is your signature, and we can both be free." Richard stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Free," he repeated hollowly. "Yes." She forced brightness into her voice, though her heart was fragmenting. "Free to find genuine love, authentic marriage, real happiness. Isn't that what you wanted for me?" Something dangerous flashed in Richard's eyes. "And what makes you think I'll simply let you walk away?" The question hung between them, loaded with 3 years of unspoken tension. Decker felt her pulse accelerate, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Because you're a good man, Richard Bance, no matter what demons you think you're fighting. And good men don't keep women prisoner in loveless marriages." Loveless. The word came out like a curse. Richard moved closer, and Decker caught the scent of his cologne, mixed with whiskey, and something uniquely him that made her knees weak. "Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it?" She struggled to keep her voice level. "We live like polite strangers. We sleep in separate wings of the house. We've never even—" She stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. "Never even what, Decker?" His voice was dangerously soft now, and he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes. "You know what?" she whispered. "Say it." The command was quiet but absolute. "Tell me what we've never done." Her breath came faster. "We've never made love. We've never even kissed except for show. You've never touched me like a husband touches his wife. And you think that's because I don't want to?" The question was raw, tortured. Decker's eyes filled with tears. "I know it is. You made that clear on our wedding night." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "God, you have no idea, do you? No idea what it's cost me to stay away from you? No idea how many nights I've stood outside your door, fighting every instinct I have? No idea how beautiful you are, how perfect, how completely you've destroyed every defense I've ever built?" The envelope slipped from Decker's numb fingers, fluttering to the Persian rug. "Richard, do you want to know the truth?" He backed her against his desk, his hands gripping the mahogany on either side of her, caging her in. "The truth is that I've been in love with you since the day you walked into my office 3 years ago, all fierce determination and quiet dignity. The truth is that every morning I wake up wanting you so desperately it's a physical ache. The truth is that watching other men look at you, dance with you, desire what I can't let myself have, it's pure torment." Decker's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then why—" "Because I'm terrified," he said simply, and the raw honesty in his voice broke her heart. "Terrified that if I touch you, I'll become the monster my father was. Terrified that I'll love you so completely, so possessively, that I'll destroy everything. Radiant about you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're not him, Richard. How can you be sure?" His face was inches from hers now, his breath warm against her skin. "How can you be certain when I can't even trust myself? When just the thought of you with another man makes me want to burn the world down?" "Because," she whispered, reaching up to cup his face with trembling hands, The man who plays Chopin like his heart is breaking, who secretly supports my dreams, who works himself to exhaustion rather than risk hurting me. That man is not a monster. He's the man I fell in love with. Richard's control cracked visibly. His eyes squeezed shut, and a shudder ran through his powerful frame. Decca, don't say things like that. Why? Because they're true. She stroked, her thumbs across his cheekbones, feeling the tension in his jaw. I love you, Richard. I've loved you for 3 years, and I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this, pretending I don't ache for you every single day. When he opened his eyes, the pain in them stole her breath. If you divorce me, where will you go? Does it matter? It matters to me. His voice was barely a whisper. It matters that I'll never see you again, never hear your laugh, never catch the scent of your perfume in the hallway. It matters that some other man will get to hold you, love you, give you the children and the life you deserve. Richard! Sign the papers, he said suddenly, straightening and stepping back. The loss of his warmth left her bereft. Sign them tonight. I'll have my lawyers expedite the process. Decca stared at him in shock. Just like that? Just like that. But his hands were shaking as he poured himself another whiskey. You're right. You deserve better than this half-life I've given you. The dismissal hurt more than she'd expected. After 3 years of careful distance, she'd finally gotten him to admit his feelings, only to have him push her away again. The pattern was so familiar, so maddening, that she wanted to scream. Instead, she bent and picked up the envelope, her movements deliberate and controlled. Fine, she said quietly. I'll be gone by morning. She turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her at the door. Decca? She didn't turn around. What? For what it's worth, these have been the most precious 3 years of my life, even living like strangers, even pretending not to love you. Having you here, in my home, in my life, it's been worth every moment of agony. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but she didn't let him see. Goodbye, Richard. As she walked away, she heard the crash of crystal against the wall, followed by a sound that might have been her name torn from his throat like a prayer. But she didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she did, she'd never find the strength to leave the man who was too afraid to love her the way she deserved to be loved. Chapter 4. Richard's Desperate Plea. Dawn was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold when Decca finally finished packing. Her Louis Vuitton suitcases sat by the door of her suite, filled with 3 years of memories and carefully folded dreams. The rest, the furniture, the artwork, the life she'd built in the East Wing would remain behind, monuments to a love that had never been allowed to flourish. She'd changed into a simple black dress, professional and impersonal, the kind of outfit that announced she was ready to face the world as Decca Whedon again, not Mrs. Bance. Her wedding ring sat on the marble vanity, the diamond catching the morning light like crystallized tears. A soft knock at her door made her heart skip, but when she opened it, she found Ophelia standing in the hallway with red-rimmed eyes and a silver tray. "I thought you might want some coffee before you leave," Ophelia said quietly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "It's prepared exactly the way you like it." Decca's throat tightened. Even Richard's assistant had become family. Over the years, one of the few bright spots in her isolated existence. "Thank you, Ophelia, for everything. Mrs. Bance, Decca, I want you to know that you've been the most wonderful part of working here. You brought light to this house, warmth to places that had been cold for so long." Ophelia's voice wavered. "He's going to be lost without you." "He made his choice," Decca said softly, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Did he?" Ophelia asked, and there was something in her tone that made Decca look up sharply. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man who's terrified of his own feelings, making the worst mistake of his life. Before Decker could respond, Ophelia was gone, leaving her alone with her coffee and the crushing weight of finality. In an hour, Tempest would arrive to drive her to the airport. By noon, she'd be back in her childhood home, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life without the man who'd become her whole world. She was reaching for her coffee when footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Heavy, uneven, stumbling, not the measured stride of staff or the quick clip of Ophelia's heels. These footsteps belonged to someone who was either drunk or devastated, possibly both. The knock, when it came, was barely audible. 3 soft taps that somehow conveyed more desperation than pounding would have. Decker's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. She knew who it was before she opened it, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of Richard Bance completely undone. He still wore last night's tuxedo, but the bow tie was gone, the shirt unbuttoned to reveal the strong column of his throat. His usually immaculate hair stood in dark waves, as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours, but it was his eyes that shattered her heart. Red-rimmed, wild, filled with a pain so profound it stole her breath. Richard. His name was a whisper on her lips. Don't go. The words tumbled out of him, raw and desperate. Please, God, Decker, don't go. She stepped back instinctively, and he followed her into the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He looked around at her packed suitcases, the impersonal space that no longer held any trace of her presence, and something inside him seemed to fracture. I signed the papers, he said, his voice breaking. They're on your vanity. All the legal documents, the financial arrangements, everything you'll need. You're free, exactly as you wanted. Decker's gaze flew to the vanity, where indeed a thick stack of papers sat beside her wedding ring, her freedom, purchased with his signature and sealed with his anguish. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. He laughed bitterly. Don't thank me for being the biggest fool who ever lived. Don't thank me for wasting 3 years that we could have spent. He stopped, his voice cracking completely. Richard, you're drunk. Not drunk enough, he said, but his words weren't slurred. If anything, his pain had burned away the alcohol, leaving him crystalline in his agony. Not nearly drunk enough to forget the look on your face when I pushed you away. Not drunk enough to stop imagining you in another man's arms, another man's bed, another man's life. Heat flooded Decker's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. That's what you want, remember. For me to find someone who can love me properly. What I want, Richard said, moving closer, with the predatory grace that had first attracted her, is to burn down the world rather than let another man touch you. What I want is to lock you in this room and spend the rest of my life proving how much I love you. What I want is to be the man you deserve instead of the coward I've become. Decker's pulse quickened. You're not a coward. I am. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her face, not quite touching. I'm a coward who spent 3 years worshipping you from a distance because I was too afraid to risk destroying you. Too afraid to trust that love doesn't have to be toxic, that passion doesn't have to be possessive. And now, she whispered, now I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of becoming my father. His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. Now I realize that living without you isn't protecting you. It's killing us both. Decker leaned into his touch, despite herself, her eyes fluttering closed. 3 years. 3 years she'd dreamed of this moment, of Richard finally choosing her over his fear. It's too late, she said softly, even as her heart screamed the opposite. Is it? His thumb traced across her cheekbone, catching a tear she didn't realize had fallen. Because I have a proposition for you. She opened her eyes, seeing hope and terror warring in his grey gaze. One night, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Give me one night to show you who I truly am underneath all this fear and self-loathing. One night to love you the way I should have been loving you all along. Richard, if I disappoint you, if I prove that I really am the monster I've always believed myself to be, then you walk away tomorrow with my blessing. But if I can show you that I'm capable of change, that 3 years of therapy and self-reflection have taught me the difference between love and possession. He swallowed hard. Then maybe you'll consider giving us a genuine chance. Decca stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. You've been in therapy. A rueful smile ghosted across his lips. For 2 years. Dr. Sage Winters. Dante insisted, after he found me in my office at 3 a.m., drunk and talking to your portrait like you could hear me. There's a portrait of me. In my private office. Dante commissioned it for our first anniversary. I stare at it every day and torture myself with what might have been if I'd been braver, stronger, better. His hand trembled against her skin. One night, Decca. One night. To show you that love doesn't have to hurt, that passion can be tender, that I can worship you without destroying you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Decca could feel herself wavering, could feel 3 years of careful walls crumbling under the weight of his desperate honesty. If I say yes, she whispered, it changes everything. We can't go back to being strangers after this. I don't want to go back, Richard said fiercely. I want to go forward. I want to spend the rest of my life earning the love you've already given me. I want to be your husband in every way that matters. And if it doesn't work, if we try and fail, then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have one perfect night to remember, instead of a lifetime of regrets. His forehead touched hers, and she could feel his breath against her lips. What do you say, Mrs. Bance? Will you give your husband one last chance to win your heart? The endearment spoken with such tender reverence was her undoing. Despite everything, despite 3 years of pain and loneliness and careful distance, she was still his wife. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to find out what that could really mean. Yes, she whispered, and felt his whole body sag with relief. One night, Richard. Show me who you really are. Chapter 5. Walls Come Down. Richard led her to the sitting area by the fireplace, his hand warm and steady around hers. The simple contact sent electricity through Decca's entire body. After 3 years of careful distance, even this innocent touch felt monumental. He'd built a fire while she'd been packing, she realized, the golden flames casting dancing shadows across his face as he settled beside her on the velvet sofa. I don't know where to begin, he admitted, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. Begin with her, Decca said softly. Begin with your mother. Richard's jaw clenched, but he didn't pull away. Aretha. Her name was Aretha, and she was the most radiant woman I'd ever seen. At least that's how I remember her before. He stopped, running his free hand through his dark hair. Before what? Before my father destroyed her piece by piece. The words came out bitter, filled with old pain. She was a singer when they met. Did you know that? She had this incredible voice, like honey and smoke. She used to sing me to sleep with old jazz standards. Decca's heart clenched at the image of a young Richard being sung to sleep by his mother. What happened to her music? Cassius happened. Richard's grip on her hand tightened unconsciously. My father was controlling, possessive. He said a wife of his didn't need to work, didn't need friends, didn't need anything but him and their son. So she gave up her career, her dreams, everything that made her who she was. That must have been difficult for you to watch. Richard laughed bitterly. At first, I thought it was normal. I was just a child. What did I know about healthy relationships? But as I got older, I started to see the signs, the way she flinched when he raised his voice, the way she'd stare out windows like she was dreaming of escape, the way her beautiful voice got quieter and quieter until some days she barely spoke at all. Decker squeezed his hand, offering what comfort she could. She was depressed. Among other things, Cassius had convinced her that she was nothing without him, that no one else would ever want her, that she was lucky to have his love. Richard's voice hardened. He called it love, but it was possession, control. He isolated her from everyone who cared about her, made her financially dependent on him, convinced her that she was worthless. But she left eventually. When I was 8. Richard stared into the fire, his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I remember that morning so vividly. I came downstairs for breakfast, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 suitcases. She looked hollow, like someone had drained all the life out of her. What did she say? That she was sorry, that she loved me, but couldn't stay, that someday I'd understand. His voice cracked slightly. I begged her to take me with her. I clung to her legs and sobbed, but she just left, got in a taxi and never looked back. Tears rolled down Decker's cheeks. Richard, I'm so sorry. The worst part, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, was what my father said after she was gone. He sat me down and explained that this was what happened when men loved women too intensely, too completely. That love was dangerous, destructive, that women were fragile creatures who couldn't handle genuine passion, real devotion. That's not love, Decker said fiercely. What your father did to your mother, that wasn't love, that was abuse. I know that now. Dr. Winters has spent 2 years helping me understand the difference. But at 8 years old, all I knew was that my mother had abandoned me because my father's so-called love had driven her away. Richard turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face. Do you understand now why I was so terrified to touch you, to let myself feel what I felt? You were afraid you'd become him, terrified. Because the way I love you, Decker, it's consuming, it's all-encompassing. When I see you laugh, my whole world lights up. When I see you cry, I want to destroy whatever caused your pain. When I imagine you with another man, his jaw clenched, the rage I feel is primal, possessive, exactly the kind of toxic emotion that destroyed my mother. Decker pulled her hands free and reached up to cup his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. But you've never acted on that rage. You've never tried to control me or isolate me. You've done the opposite. You've given me complete freedom, supported my dreams, encouraged my independence. Because I was fighting it every day, Richard said, leaning into her touch. Fighting the urge to lock you away where only I could see you, where no other man could look at you the way I do. And that fight, that self-control, that's what proves you're not your father. Decker's thumbs stroked across his cheekbones. Cassius gave in to his worst impulses. You've spent 3 years protecting me from yours. Something shifted in Richard's expression, a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. Dr. Winters said something similar. She said that self-awareness was the first step toward healing, that the fact that I recognized the pattern meant I could break it. She sounds like a wise woman. She also said that I was punishing both of us for crimes I never committed. Richard's smile was rueful. Apparently, choosing to be alone rather than risk hurting someone is just another form of emotional unavailability. Decker felt a laugh bubble up, despite the emotional intensity of their conversation. She definitely sounds wise. Your turn, Richard said softly, his hands coming up to cover hers where they still cupped his face. Tell me why you stayed. Tell me why you put up with 3 years of a husband who couldn't touch you. The request caught her off guard, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. Richard, please, I need to understand. I need to know what I did to deserve a woman who would wait 3 years for a man too broken to love her properly. Decker took a shaky breath, gathering courage from the warmth in his eyes. You want to know why I stayed? Because I saw glimpses of who you really were. The way you'd leave my favorite flowers in the library where you knew I'd find them. The way you'd adjust the temperature in the East Wing because you noticed I was always cold. The way you'd have Ophelia reschedule meetings so you wouldn't miss my charity events. Richard's eyes widened. You knew about all that? I knew. And I knew about the portrait in your office, the investments in my business, the way you'd find excuses to walk past my studio just to catch a glimpse of me working. She smiled through her tears. I stayed because even though you couldn't say the words, you showed me every day that you loved me. But it wasn't enough, Richard said quietly. If it had been, you wouldn't have been ready to leave. It wasn't enough because I needed more than glimpses, Richard. I needed all of you, not just the carefully controlled pieces you felt safe. Sharing. Decca's voice grew stronger, more confident. I stayed because I love you, not the perfect, controlled version you think you need to be, but the real you. The man who plays piano at midnight when he thinks no one can hear. The man who works 18-hour days because he doesn't know how to rest. The man who's so afraid of becoming a monster that he's forgotten he's allowed to be human. I don't know how to be human, Richard admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know how to love without fear, how to touch without worrying I'll hurt you, how to be a real husband instead of a careful stranger. Then learn, Decca whispered, leaning closer until their foreheads touched. Learn with me. Let me teach you that love doesn't have to hurt, that passion doesn't have to be possessive, that you can worship me without destroying me. What if I fail? What if I hurt you without meaning to? Then we'll heal together. She pressed her lips to his forehead, a soft benediction. Richard, I'm not your mother. I'm not fragile or breakable or weak. I'm strong enough to handle your love, all of it, even the dark parts you're afraid to show me. Promise me, he said urgently, his hands sliding into her hair. Promise me that if I ever begin to become him, if I ever try to control you or diminish you or make you feel small, you'll tell me, you'll fight me, you'll leave if you have to. I promise, she said solemnly. But Richard, you need to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll stop punishing yourself for your father's sins. Promise me you'll let yourself be happy, let yourself love me without fear. Her voice grew fierce, passionate. Promise me you'll stop being afraid of becoming a monster and start believing you're worthy of being loved. Richard stared at her for a long moment, seeing not just her beauty, but her strength, her courage, her unwavering faith in him. Slowly, like a man awakening from a long nightmare, he smiled. I promise, he whispered, and sealed the vow with their first real kiss, tender, desperate, 3 years of longing compressed into one perfect moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Richard rested his forehead against hers. Now what? He asked softly. Decca smiled, her heart full of hope for the first time in years. Now you show me what it feels like to be loved by Richard Bance, instead of protected from him. Chapter 6. The first touch. The kiss changed everything. 3 years of careful distance, of stolen glances and unspoken longing, dissolved in the space between one heartbeat and the next. When Richard's lips touched hers, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence, Decca felt like she was finally coming home. God, Decca, he breathed against her mouth, his voice rough with wonder and years of suppressed desire. I've dreamed of this so many times, imagined what you'd taste like, what you'd feel like in my arms, but nothing could have prepared me for how exquisite you are. His hands framed her face with infinite tenderness, thumbs tracing the high curve of her cheekbones as if she were made of the finest porcelain. The reverence in his touch made her heart ache with beauty. This was not a man taking what he wanted, but a man worshipping what he'd been blessed with. A man touching something sacred for the first time. "Richard," she whispered, her hands fisting in the lapels of his wrinkled tuxedo shirt. I need to feel you, really feel you, all of you." Understanding flickered in his grey eyes like lightning, and with movements that spoke of 3 years of careful restraint finally unleashed, he stood and extended his hand to her. His fingers trembled slightly, this powerful CEO reduced to nervous anticipation by the woman he loved. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because once I start touching you, really touching you, I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop. I've wanted you for so long, Decker, so desperately." The raw honesty in his admission, the way his hand trembled as he waited for her answer, told her everything she needed to know about his intentions. This wasn't about possession or conquest. This was about worship, about love so long denied finally finding expression. "I'm certain," she said, placing her hand in his and allowing him to draw her to her feet. "I've been certain for 3 years. I've been waiting for you to be ready to love me." He led her to the bedroom, their bedroom for the first time, and Decker felt her breath catch at what she saw. While she'd been packing, while she'd been preparing to leave forever, Richard had transformed the space into something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of white candles flickered throughout the room, casting everything in warm, golden light that danced across the walls like liquid amber. Rose petals, white, and the softest blush pink, her favorites, were scattered across the silk comforter. In intricate patterns that spoke of hours of careful arrangement, the scent of jasmine and vanilla filled the air, the same perfume she'd worn on their wedding night, as if he'd been saving this moment, planning for it even in his darkest despair. Fresh gardenias floated in crystal bowls on the nightstands, their creamy petals luminous in the candlelight. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers, Ella Fitzgerald's voice wrapping around them like silk, singing about love and longing and all the beautiful things that came with opening your heart. The French doors to the balcony were open, allowing the evening breeze to drift in, carrying the scent of the rose garden below and making the curtains dance like ghosts of dreams finally coming true. "When did you do all this?" she asked, tears pricking her eyes at the obvious care he'd taken, the hours of preparation, while his heart was breaking. "While you were packing," he admitted, color rising in his cheeks. "I kept thinking about our wedding night, about how I'd failed you so completely. I wanted to give you the night you should have had then, the night you deserved, the night I was too broken to give you." The thoughtfulness, the romance of it, overwhelmed her. This was the Richard she'd glimpsed in stolen moments, the man capable of grand gestures and tender care, the man who'd been hiding beneath layers of fear and self-protection, waiting for the courage to emerge. "It's like a dream," she breathed, turning slowly to take in every detail. "You're the dream," he corrected, moving to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm through the thin fabric of her black dress. "You've always been the dream I was too afraid to believe could come true." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine, feeling the tension in his powerful frame as he fought for control. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." "I know," he said softly, his lips finding the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid. You've made me brave, Decker. You've made me whole." The kiss he pressed there was soft, exploratory, as if he were mapping new territory. Decker's eyes fluttered closed as he continued his gentle assault, his mouth trailing along the column of her throat with reverent attention. Each touch was a promise, a vow to worship her the way she deserved, a declaration that he would spend the rest of his life making up for the time they'd lost. "Turn around," he requested softly, his voice rough with desire and something deeper, love so profound it changed the very air between them. When she did, the look in his eyes stole her breath. There was love there, yes, but also wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe he was finally allowed to touch her, to love her without fear. His hands moved to the zipper of her dress, pausing at the base of her neck. "May I?" he asked, and the gentle formality of the question, the way he sought her permission for everything, made her heart overflow with love for this complicated, beautiful man. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to everything, Richard. Yes to all of it." Slowly, reverently, he drew the zipper down, his knuckles brushing against her skin as the black fabric parted. The dress pooled at her feet like dark water, leaving her standing before him in delicate lace that complemented her ebony skin beautifully. She should have felt exposed, vulnerable, but the way Richard looked at her, like she was a goddess made flesh, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, made her feel powerful instead. "Exquisite," he whispered, his hands hovering, just above her skin, not quite touching. "You're absolutely exquisite. Perfect and radiant, and so beautiful it hurts to look at you." "Richard, please," she said softly, catching his hands and pressing them to her waist. "Touch me, really touch me. I need to feel your hands on me. I've dreamed of it for so long." The contact seemed to break the last of his restraint. His hands mapped her body with slow, deliberate care. The curve of her waist, the flare of her hips, the soft skin of her shoulders. Every touch was a revelation. 3 years of denied desire compressed into moments of pure connection. He touched her like she was precious, like she was something rare and wonderful that he'd been entrusted to protect and cherish. "I love you," he said against her ear as his hands tangled in her hair, finally freeing it from its careful updo. The dark waves spilled over her shoulders like silk, and Richard buried his face in the fragrant mass. "I love you so much it terrifies me. You're everything good in my world, everything light and beautiful and worth protecting." "Then protect me," she said, her hands working to unbutton his shirt with trembling fingers. "Protect me by loving me, not by staying away from me. Protect me by showing me how much you want me." "Yes," he agreed, catching her hands and bringing them to his lips. He kissed each palm, each fingertip, with such tender attention that tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to love you the way you deserve to be loved. I'm going to worship you until you never doubt how precious you are to me." When he lifted her in his arms, carrying her to the bed as if she weighed nothing, Dacre felt like a bride again, not the confused, heartbroken woman from 3 years ago, but the woman she was meant to be, loved and cherished and desired beyond measure. He laid her down among the rose petals with infinite care, then stood for a moment just looking at her. The candlelight painted gold highlights across her dark skin, and Richard thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. She was magnificent, strong and soft, and absolutely perfect. And somehow, miraculously, she was his. "What are you thinking?" she asked, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he said simply, joining her on the bed. "That somehow, despite everything I've done wrong, fate decided to bless me with you. That I must have done something right in a past life to deserve this moment." He kissed her then, deeper this time, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips until she opened for him. The taste of her was intoxicating, sweet and warm, and infinitely precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Richard trailed, his lips down her throat to the delicate hollow at the base. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with desire. "Tell me how to love you. Tell me how to make this perfect for you." "Like this," she breathed, her hands sliding into his dark hair. "Slowly, tenderly, like we have forever, like you're discovering me for the first time." "We do have forever," he promised, his mouth finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "And I am discovering you for the first time, the real you, the woman I was too afraid to love before. As his hands and mouth continued their gentle exploration, mapping every inch of her with reverent care, Decca felt herself coming apart in the most beautiful way. This wasn't just physical pleasure, this was emotional healing, 3 years of loneliness and rejection being washed away by Richard's tender worship. He took his time, lavishing attention on every part of her body as if each inch was sacred. His touch was reverent, worshipful, as he traced patterns on her skin with fingers that trembled with the magnitude of his feelings. He whispered endearments against her throat, her collarbone, her heart, telling her how beautiful she was, how perfect, how desperately he'd wanted her all these years. I used to lie awake at night, he confessed against her skin, listening to you move around in your room, imagining what it would be like to hold you, to touch you, to make love to you the way a husband should love his wife. I tortured myself with thoughts of you, with dreams of moments like this. I knew, she gasped, as he lavished attention on the sensitive skin of her collarbone. I could feel you thinking about me. Sometimes I would stand by my door and imagine you were on the other side, wanting me as much as I wanted you. God, Decca, he groaned, his control fraying at the edges. Do you know what it did to me, being so close to you and not being able to touch you? Watching you bloom into this incredible woman and not being able to tell you how proud I was, how amazed I was by your strength and your talent and your grace. Show me now, she whispered, pulling him down to her. Show me everything you wanted to say, everything you wanted to do. Show me how much you love me. I love you, he said against her heart, his voice rough with emotion. I love your strength, your compassion, your incredible talent. I love the way you laugh, the way you think, the way you've never given up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. As he continued to worship her with hands and mouth, Decca felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was what she'd dreamed of, what she'd longed for during those 3 lonely years. Not just the physical connection, but this emotional intimacy, this complete vulnerability, this absolute certainty that she was loved beyond measure. I love you too, she gasped, her hands roaming over the strong muscles of his back. I love your kindness, your intelligence, the way you care for everyone around you, even when you think you don't deserve love yourself. I love the man you are when you're not afraid. When they finally came together, it was with a gentleness that brought tears to both their eyes. This wasn't just the joining of bodies, but the healing of souls, the completion of a circle that had been broken for too long. Richard moved within her with exquisite care, as if she were made of the finest crystal, his forehead pressed to hers, his grey eyes locked on her brown ones. My wife, he whispered, as he loved her slowly, thoroughly, completely. My beautiful, precious wife, my heart, my everything. My husband, she replied, her heart overflowing with joy. Finally, truly my husband. They moved together in perfect harmony, 3 years of longing and love finally finding expression in the most intimate way possible. Every touch was electric, every kiss a promise, every movement a declaration of love so profound it seemed to change the very air around them. When release finally claimed them, it was together, their cries of pleasure mixing with whispered declarations of love, their bodies trembling with the force of their connection. In that moment, they weren't just husband and wife, they were soulmates, 2 halves of the same whole finally reunited. Afterward, they lay entwined among the rose petals, their bodies slick with perspiration, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Richard gathered Decca close to his chest, his arms wrapped around her like he would never let her go again. That was... Decca began, then trailed off, unable to find words for the magnitude of what had just happened between them. Perfect, Richard. Finished, pressing soft kisses to her temple. You were perfect, we were perfect. I never understood that love could be like this. Healing instead of destructive, life-giving instead of soul-crushing. This is what love is supposed to be, Decker said softly, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. Gentle and fierce at the same time, passionate but safe, consuming but nurturing. I wasted so much time, Richard said, his voice thick with regret. 3 years we could have been like this. 3 years of loving you the way you deserve to be loved. We're here now, Decker said firmly, tilting her head up to look at him. That's what matters. We're here now, and we have the rest of our lives to love each other like this. The rest of our lives, Richard repeated, wonder in his voice. I used to think that sounded like a prison sentence. Now it sounds like paradise. They talked through the night, sharing dreams and fears, planning their future, making up for 3 years of careful silence. Richard told her about his business, plans, about how he wanted to step back and focus on their marriage. Decker shared her design aspirations, her dreams of building a fashion empire that would empower women and celebrate beauty in all its forms. I want to give you everything, Richard said as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Not just money or success, but everything you've ever dreamed of. I want to be the man who makes all your dreams come true. You already... Decker assured him, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. You're exactly the man I've been waiting for. You're worth every lonely night, every tear, every moment of doubt. You're worth everything, Richard. As the sun rose over their garden, casting golden light through the open doors, they made love again. Slowly, tenderly, with the languid pleasure of lovers who finally had all the time in the world. This time there was no desperate urgency, just the quiet joy of connection, the peaceful satisfaction of two souls, finally at rest in each other's arms. I love you, Mrs. Bance, Richard whispered as they lay watching the sunrise. Decker curled against his side like she belonged there. I love you too, Mr. Bance, she replied, her voice soft with contentment. Forever and always. Forever and always, he agreed, and in that moment, surrounded by the scent of roses and the soft glow of dawn, they both knew that their real love story was just beginning. The night had transformed them both. Richard from a man afraid of his own capacity for love into a husband ready to cherish his wife completely, and Decker from a woman accepting scraps of affection into a woman claiming the love she deserved. They had found their way to each other at last, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the years to come, they would look back on this night as the moment their true marriage began, not with the exchange of vows in front of hundreds of guests, but with the exchange of hearts in a room lit by candles and filled with love. This was their real wedding night, the one that would matter for all the days of their lives. And as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, the last of the candles flickering out as dawn claimed the sky, both Richard and Decker knew that they had finally found their way home. Chapter 7. A New Beginning. Decker woke to something she'd never experienced in 3 years of marriage, her husband's arms around her. Sunlight streamed through the gossamer curtains, painting the bedroom in shades of gold and honey. But it was the warmth of Richard's body pressed against hers that made her feel truly illuminated. She turned in his embrace, careful not to wake him, and studied his sleeping face. The harsh lines of tension that usually marked his features were gone, replaced by an almost boyish peace. His dark hair was tousled from her fingers, and there was the faintest smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He looked younger, lighter, as if some invisible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured without opening his eyes, his voice rough with sleep and satisfaction. "How did you know I was awake?" she asked, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. "Because your breathing changed." His arms tightened around her, and when he opened his eyes, the love shining there took her breath away. "Also because I can feel you thinking. What's going on in that brilliant mind of yours?" Decker traced lazy patterns on his chest, marveling at how different everything felt. Yesterday morning, she'd been preparing to leave forever. Now she was lying in her husband's arms, planning a future she'd never dared dream of. "I'm thinking about how different you seem," she said honestly. "You're softer somehow, more open." Richard's laugh rumbled beneath her ear. "Dr. Winters warned me this might happen. Apparently, suppressing your true nature for years has a way of making the authentic you emerge once the dam breaks." "Emerge is one way to put it," Decker teased, remembering the passionate intensity of the night before. Heat flickered in Richard's grey eyes. "Careful, Mrs. Bance. Keep talking like that and we'll never leave this bed." The endearment, spoken with such warm possessiveness, sent shivers down her spine. Would that be such a terrible thing? Terrible? No. Irresponsible? Absolutely. Richard's hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up to his. "Because as much as I want to spend the rest of the day worshipping every inch of your beautiful body, we have things to discuss. Important things, such as the fact that I've been deceiving you for 3 years about your business." The admission came out in a rush, and Decker saw guilt flicker across his features. She raised an eyebrow. "I already know you've been secretly investing in my company, Richard. Did you think I wouldn't notice? You know about the investments, yes, but there's more." Richard sat up, pulling her with him, so they were facing each other cross-legged on the silk sheets. The vulnerable expression on his face made her heart clench. "Decker, your designs, they're not just exceptional, they're revolutionary. The fashion world has been buzzing about your work for 2 years, and it's not because of my money." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Seraphina Moon didn't wear your gown to the Met Gala because I asked her to. She wore it because when her stylist showed her your portfolio, she said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen." Richard's hands found hers, gripping tightly. "I'm saying that Vogue has been trying to get an interview with you for months, but I've been having Ophelia deflect them because I was afraid it would take you away from me." Decker stared at him in shock. "Vogue wants to interview me?" "Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar. They all do. There's even talk of offering you a position as creative director at one of the major fashion houses." Richard's voice was thick with pride and regret. "You're talented, Decker, incredibly, amazingly talented, and I've been so scared of losing you that I've been sabotaging your career without even realizing it." Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. "You really think my designs are good?" "I think your designs are going to change the fashion industry," Richard said fiercely. "I think you're going to be one of the most celebrated designers of your generation. And I think I've been a selfish fool for trying to keep you to myself." "What changed your mind?" Richard's smile was rueful. "The realization that loving someone means wanting them to shine, not hiding their light under a bushel. I want the whole world to see how incredible you are, even if it means sharing you." Decker launched herself into his arms, kissing him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want a position at another fashion house," she said softly. "I want to build something of my own, something we can be proud of together." Together. Richard's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the hope in his eyes. Together, if you want to be involved, that is. "As my husband, not my secret investor." She smiled, feeling bold and beautiful and infinitely loved. "I want Bance Industries to partner with Whedon Designs officially. I want the whole world to know that Richard Bance believes in his wife's talent." The whole world, Richard's grin was wicked, including the fashion press that's been dying to get an interview with the mysterious Mrs. Bance, especially them. Decker's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I think it's time they learned that the reclusive CEO's wife has been hiding in plain sight, building an empire one stitch at a time." Richard's laughter filled the room, rich and joyous, in a way she'd never heard before. God, I love your confidence. I love your ambition. I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about your dreams. And I love that you want to be part of those dreams, instead of protecting me from them. She traced the line of his jaw, marveling at how relaxed he looked. What else has changed, Richard? What other secrets have you been keeping? His expression grew serious. I've been planning to step back from the day-to-day operations of Bance Industries. Dante's more than capable of running things, and I want to focus on us, on our marriage, our future, maybe even... He trailed off. Color rising in his cheeks. Maybe even what? Maybe even starting a family, he said quietly, if that's something you want. I know we've never talked about children, but I find myself imagining what our daughter might look like, whether she'd have your eyes or your smile or your incredible strength. Decca's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. A daughter? Or a son? Or both? Or however many children you want to have? Richard's hands framed her face, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. I want to build a life with you, Decca. A real life, full of love and laughter and all the things I was too afraid to dream of before. I want that too, she whispered. I want everything with you. Then let's start planning. Richard's smile was brilliant, transformative. Let's plan your fashion empire, our family, our future. Let's plan the life we should have been living all along. As if summoned by their happiness, a soft knock interrupted them. Ophelia's voice came through the door, carefully neutral. Mr. Bance, I hate to disturb you, but you have a call from Tokyo. Apparently the merger talks have stalled, and they're requesting your immediate input. Richard's expression darkened, the old tension returning to his shoulders. Tell them I'll call back. In an hour? No, Decca interrupted, placing her hand on his chest. Tell them you'll call back tomorrow. Today belongs to us. Richard stared at her in amazement. You want me to postpone a multi-million-dollar deal? I want you to prioritize your marriage over your work, just for one day. Decca's smile was radiant. Besides, isn't this what you paid Dante for? Let him handle Tokyo while you handle your wife. The wicked grin that spread across Richard's face made her pulse quicken. Handle my wife, I like the sound of that, he called out to Ophelia, his voice strong and certain. Tell Tokyo I'll be unavailable until tomorrow. Route all calls through Dante. Mrs. Bance and I are not to be disturbed. Yes, sir, came Ophelia's reply, and Decca could hear the smile in her voice. As footsteps retreated down the hallway, Richard turned back to Decca with an expression of pure adoration. Now, where were we, Mrs. Bance? I believe you were promising to show me what the rest of our life is going to look like, she said, pulling him down for another kiss. Then let me start with today, he murmured against her lips, and then tomorrow, and every day after that, for the rest of our lives. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, painting their bedroom in shades of gold and promise, Richard kept that vow in the most beautiful way possible. Chapter 8. Facing the Past. 2 weeks into their new beginning, Richard's carefully reconstructed world received an earthquake that threatened to topple everything he'd built. The call came on a Tuesday morning while he and Decca were having breakfast in the sunroom, feeding each other pieces of fresh fruit and planning their upcoming trip to Paris for Fashion Week. Ophelia's voice was uncharacteristically shaky when she interrupted their intimate meal. Mr. Bance, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a woman here to see you. She says she's your mother. The piece of mango Decca had been offering Richard fell from her fingers, forgotten. The color drained from her husband's face as he slowly set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. That's impossible, he said quietly. My mother is dead to me. Sir, she's quite insistent. She says her name is Aretha Bance, and she resembles you, sir. Around the eyes. Richard's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his body rigid with tension. For a moment Decca saw the old Richard, cold, controlled, completely shut down. Then she stood as well, moving to his side and slipping her hand into his. "You don't have to see her," she said softly. "You can ask her to leave." "No." Richard's voice was hollow, but his grip on her hand was tight. "No, if she's really here, if she's really alive, I need to know why. I need to know why she left me and never looked back." They found Aretha Bance in the main sitting room, perched on the edge of the antique sofa, as if ready to flee at any moment. Decca's first thought was that Ophelia had been right. The woman did resemble Richard around the eyes, but where his were sharp and grey like storm clouds, hers were faded, weary, filled with a sadness so profound it seemed to have carved permanent lines into her dark skin. She was smaller than Decca had expected, more fragile. Her hair, once probably as thick and lustrous as Richard's, was now silver-streaked and pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a plain black dress that had seen better days, and her hands shook slightly as she clutched a worn leather purse. Richard. The name fell from her lips like a prayer, and tears immediately spilled down her cheeks. "Oh, my boy, look how handsome you've become." Richard stood, frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. 27 years, he said, his voice deadly quiet. 27 years, and that's what you have to say to me? Aretha flinched, as if he'd struck her. "I know you must hate me." "Hate you?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "I don't hate you, Aretha. I feel nothing for you. You've been dead to me since the day you walked out that door and never looked back." "Richard," Decca said softly, squeezing his hand. She could feel the pain radiating from him in waves, the little boy who'd been abandoned warring with the man who'd learned to protect himself. "No, Decca, you don't understand." He pulled his hand free, moving deeper into the room but maintaining distance from the woman who'd given birth to him. "This woman destroyed my childhood, my ability to trust, my capacity to love. She left me alone with a monster, and now she wants to waltz back into my life like nothing happened." "You're right," Aretha said quietly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to even be in the same room as you. But I'm dying, Richard. I have maybe 6 months left, and I couldn't go without trying to explain." "Explain what?" The words exploded from Richard with volcanic force. "Explain how you could abandon your 8-year-old son? Explain how you could leave me to deal with Cassius alone? Explain how you could disappear for nearly 3 decades without so much as a phone call to see if I was alive?" Decca watched her husband fall apart, saw decades of suppressed pain and rage pouring out of him like poison from a wound. Her heart broke for the little boy he'd been, but it also ached for the broken woman sitting before them. "I couldn't take you with me," Aretha whispered, her voice barely audible. "He threatened to kill us both if I tried, said he'd hunt us down, that no court would give a deranged woman custody of his son." "You could have fought for me." "With what?" Aretha's voice gained strength, desperation making her bold. "He'd isolated me from my family, my friends, anyone who might have helped. He controlled all the money, all the connections. I was nobody, Richard. A frightened woman with no resources and no power against one of the most influential men in the city." "So you just gave up," Richard said. But Decca heard the crack in his voice, the first sign that her husband's anger was giving way to something deeper. "I saved my life," Aretha said firmly. "And by leaving, I saved yours too. You think Cassius was terrible before, when he realized I was planning to leave, when he suspected I might try to take you. The things he threatened to do, Richard, the things he promised he'd do to both of us." "Like what?" The question came from Decca, who moved closer to Richard's side, offering silent support. Aretha's eyes flicked to her, taking in the obvious love and partnership between them. "You must be Decca. I've seen the photos in the society pages. You're even more beautiful in person. What did he threaten to do? Decker repeated, ignoring the deflection. He said he'd make it look like an accident, a car crash maybe, or a break-in gone wrong. Said he had connections in the police department, judges, who owed him favors. Said no one would question the tragic death of an unstable woman and her unfortunate son. Aretha's hands shook as she spoke. I believed him, because I'd seen what he was capable of, the way he could destroy people with a phone call, ruin lives. With a word, Richard sank into a chair, his face pale. He never threatened me directly. After you left, he was different, cold, distant, but not violent. Because you reminded him of me, Aretha said sadly. Every time he looked at you, he saw the woman who dared to leave him, but you were also his legacy, his heir. He needed you functional, successful, so he channeled his rage into making sure you'd never be weak like I was. By teaching me that love was dangerous, Richard said quietly, by convincing me that passion destroyed everything it touched. I'm so sorry. The words came out broken, desperate. I hoped that distance would make him lose interest, that eventually I could come back for you. But years passed, and I was so broken, so afraid. By the time I got my life together, you were an adult, successful, and I thought you were better off without me. Decker felt tears streaming down her face as she watched 3 decades of pain play out in front of her. What changed your mind? The diagnosis, Aretha said simply. When the doctors told me I had 6 months, maybe less, all I could think about was dying without ever telling him the truth. Without him knowing that leaving him was the hardest thing I'd ever done, that not a day passed that I didn't think about him, pray for him, love him from afar. Richard was quiet for a long moment. His hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles were white. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. I used to have nightmares that you'd come back, he said. That you'd appear at my door and beg for forgiveness, and I'd have to choose between loving you and protecting myself. I never imagined it would feel like this. How does it feel? Aretha asked hopefully. Like I'm 8 years old again, Richard admitted. Scared and angry and desperate for my mother. I'm here now, she whispered. I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm here. Decker watched her husband struggle, saw the war between his adult understanding and his childhood wounds. Without hesitation, she moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. You don't have to decide everything right now, she said softly. You don't have to forgive her or accept her or anything else, but maybe you could start with listening. Richard looked at his wife. This incredible woman who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway, and felt something shift inside. His chest. The little boy who'd been abandoned was still there, still wounded, but he was no longer alone. Tell me about the years after you left, he said finally, his voice steady. Tell me what happened to you. And as Aretha began to speak, telling the story of her long journey from broken woman to cautious survivor, Richard began to understand that sometimes the people who hurt us most are fighting battles we can't see. Healing, he realized, wasn't just about moving forward. Sometimes it was about going back and making peace with the past. Chapter 9. Public Declaration. The annual Midnight Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, drawing New York's elite to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for an evening of champagne, charity, and carefully orchestrated networking. But tonight would be different. Tonight would become the stuff of legend, whispered about in society circles for generations to come. Decker stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, making final adjustments to the flowing emerald gown she'd designed specifically for tonight. The creation was a masterpiece, silk that seemed to capture and hold light, flowing like liquid emerald around her curves. The bodice was fitted perfection, adorned with hand-sewn crystals that caught the light with every breath. The neckline was elegant yet daring, the back a cascade of silk that pooled behind her like a green waterfall. It was a gown that would stop conversations, a dress that announced to the world that Decca Banks was not just Richard's wife, but a force of nature in her own right. "You look absolutely divine," Richard said from behind her, his voice filled with awe. In the mirror, she could see him in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, custom-made Italian silk, that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. But it wasn't the expensive clothing that made him breathtaking. It was the way he looked at her, the way his eyes held nothing but adoration and pride. The past month of healing, from their reconciliation to the ongoing conversations with Aretha, had transformed him completely. Gone was the cold, controlled CEO. In his place stood a man radiant with love, confident in his happiness, unafraid to show the world exactly how he felt about his wife. "We both do," she said, leaning back against his chest. "Are you nervous about tonight?" "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh that held no fear, only excitement. "But in the most wonderful way possible. Tonight, the whole world will know how much I love you." His hand settled on her bare shoulders, warm and possessive. Tonight was significant for more than just the charity aspect. It would be their first major public appearance since their marriage had transformed from business arrangement to love story. More importantly, Richard had plans that he'd been meticulously organizing for weeks, plans that would make their love officially, publicly, undeniably real in the most spectacular way possible. "Mrs. Banks." Ophelia appeared in the doorway, her tablet in hand, but her usual professional demeanor was softened by genuine excitement. Even she seemed to sense that tonight would be special. "The car is ready, and I have the final confirmations for your special arrangements, Mr. Banks." Richard's smile was mysterious, secretive. "Perfect. Is everything exactly as I specified?" "Every detail, sir. The florists outdid themselves, the musicians are in position, and the photographer knows exactly when to be ready." Ophelia's eyes sparkled with barely contained delight. "If I may say so, sir, it's going to be magnificent." "Special arrangements." Decca raised an eyebrow in the mirror, studying her husband's reflection. "Patience, my love," Richard murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple that sent shivers down her spine. "All will be revealed in the most beautiful way possible." The drive to the Met was magical. Their Rolls-Royce glided through the city streets as Manhattan sparkled around them like a jewel box. Richard held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, occasionally lifting her fingers to his lips for soft kisses that made her heart flutter. The anticipation in the car was electric, charged with love and excitement, and the promise of something extraordinary. "Whatever you're planning," Decca said softly, "I love you for it already." "You haven't seen anything yet," Richard replied, his eyes dancing with mischief and love. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. As their car pulled up to the red carpet, Decca gasped at the sight. The entire facade was illuminated with thousands of tiny lights that twinkled like stars. Massive arrangements of white orchids and roses created a fragrant pathway, and the red carpet seemed to stretch endlessly toward the museum's grand entrance. But it was their arrival that truly began the magic of the evening. As Richard helped Decca from the car, a collective gasp rose from the gathered crowd. Photographers immediately began snapping pictures, their cameras flashing like lightning. Decca's emerald gown caught the light magnificently, making her look like a princess stepping out of a dream. But it was Richard's obvious adoration, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, that made the photographers lean forward eagerly. "Mrs. Banks! Mrs. Banks!" they called. "Can you tell us about your stunning gown?" For the first time in 3 years, Decca didn't deflect or give a polite non-answer. Instead, she smiled radiantly and said, It's an original Whedon design. My husband encouraged me to wear something that would show the world who I really am. And who is that? A reporter called out. A woman deeply in love with her husband, she replied, looking up at Richard with such pure joy that several photographers actually stopped shooting, momentarily stunned by the obvious love between them. Richard's arm tightened around her waist as they made their way up the red carpet, and Decca could hear the whispers following them. They looked completely different. Is that really Richard Bance? He's actually smiling. Look at the way he's looking at her. When did they become so obviously in love? The museum's great hall had been transformed into a wonderland of crystal and candlelight that took Decca's breath away. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across the marble floors. The famous staircase was draped in cascading white silk and adorned with thousands of white roses. Round tables covered in ivory silk and gold accents filled the space, each centerpiece a work of art, featuring towering arrangements of white orchids, roses and peonies. Soft, classical music floated through the air, performed by a string quartet positioned near the Egyptian wing. But the most beautiful sight was the guests themselves. New York's most powerful and influential people, all dressed in their finest, creating a sea of elegant gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. The lighting was soft and romantic, making everyone look like they were part of a beautiful painting come to life. "Richard, Decca!" Dante Blackwood approached with his characteristic, easy grin, but even he seemed stunned by the transformation in his best friend. "You two look absolutely magnificent. There's already buzz about Decca's gown. I've overheard at least 5 fashion editors trying to figure out who designed it." "That would be my incredibly talented wife," Richard said, and the pride in his voice made several nearby guests turn to look. This was a side of Richard Bance they'd never seen, warm, open, obviously besotted with his wife. "Speaking of your wife," Dante continued with a knowing smile, "the event organizers are looking for you, Richard. Something about the evening's program." Richard's eyes met Decca's, and she saw excitement and nervousness warring in their grey depths. "Go," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "I'll mingle and accept compliments on my gown." "Don't go far," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. The gesture was so naturally romantic that several women nearby actually sighed. For the next hour, Decca found herself swept into conversations that were unlike any she'd had at these events before. The transformation in Richard had changed how people saw her too. Instead of polite small talk, she found herself engaged in real conversations about her fashion line, her charity work, and most surprisingly, her obviously transformed marriage. "You both seem so different," commented Seraphina Moon, resplendent in one of Decca's earlier designs, a flowing silver gown that made her look like a Greek goddess. "More alive, somehow." "Love will do that to a person," Decca replied with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Love?" Seraphina's eyebrows rose elegantly. "But everyone assumed your marriage was more of a business arrangement. You always seemed so distant at these events." "We were still learning how to be married," Decca said diplomatically, but her eyes sparkled with happiness. "It took us some time to find our rhythm, but when you find the right rhythm..." She trailed off, her smile saying everything. "And you found it?" "We found everything," Decca said simply, and the joy in her voice made Seraphina's expression soften with something like envy. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft, melodious chime of crystal against glass. The room gradually quieted as Richard stepped onto a small platform that had been erected near the grand staircase. The lighting shifted subtly, creating a soft spotlight around him while leaving the rest of the room in romantic, golden illumination. He looked magnificent, tall, confident, and radiating the kind of happiness that was impossible to fake. "Ladies and gentlemen, Richard began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed space. Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Midnight Foundation's mission of providing arts education to underserved communities. It's a cause that's incredibly important to me, and even more important to my wife. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people searched for Decca's face among the guests. Richard's eyes found hers across the room, and his smile was radiant, transformative. Many of you know me as someone who keeps his private life exactly that, private. I've never been one for public declarations or emotional displays. For 3 years, I've maintained that distance, that control. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. But tonight, I want to shatter that tradition completely, because there's someone, something, that deserves to be celebrated in the most public, most beautiful way possible. Decca felt her cheeks warm as every eye in the room turned to her. This wasn't at all like the old Richard, and she could see the shock and fascination on the faces of people who'd known him for years. 3 years ago, I married a woman who was already the most incredible person I'd ever met. Decca Whedon, now Decca Banse, came into my life like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, like spring arriving after the longest winter. She's brilliant, talented, compassionate, and beautiful in ways that take my breath away every single day. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This was Richard Banse, as they'd never seen him. Vulnerable, passionate, completely unguarded. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a good husband at first. I was so terrified of loving her too much, so afraid of becoming someone I didn't want to be, that I nearly lost the most precious thing that ever happened to me. But Decca didn't give up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. She saw something in me that I couldn't see, believed in something I didn't think existed. Augustus Vale, Richard's longtime business rival, shifted uncomfortably and whispered something to his companion. Richard noticed and smiled, but there was no malice in it, only joy. I know what some of you are thinking. Augustus over there probably assumes this is some kind of publicity stunt, some calculated move to improve my image or soften my reputation. Richard's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Let me be absolutely clear. I don't care about my image. I don't care about business, implications or social expectations or what anyone in this room thinks about my marriage. The silence was deafening now. Decca could hardly breathe as Richard stepped down from the platform and began walking toward her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. The lighting followed him, creating a path of golden light that led directly to where she stood. What I care about, he continued, his eyes locked on hers, is making sure the woman I love knows exactly how I feel about her. What I care about is being the husband she deserves, not just in private, but in front of the whole world. What I care about is spending the rest of my life proving that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe. He stopped directly in front of her, and Decca gasped as he dropped to one knee. The entire ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps as Richard pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Several women in the crowd actually pressed, their hands to their hearts, caught up in the romance of the moment. Decca Banse, he said, his voice carrying through the microphone he still held. 3 years ago, I asked you to marry me for all the wrong reasons. I asked because I needed a business partner, because our families required it, because it made financial sense. He opened the box, revealing not her original wedding ring, but something entirely new, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. The gasp that rose from the crowd was audible, but Richard only had eyes for his wife. Tonight, I want to ask you again, for all the right reasons. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. I'm asking because you make me want to be better, stronger, braver than I ever imagined I could be. I'm asking because you've taught me that love doesn't have to be destructive. It can be healing, transformative, the most beautiful force in the world. Tears streamed down Decca's face as the room held its collective breath. The moment was so romantic, so perfectly executed, that several people in the crowd were crying too. I'm asking because the thought of spending even one day without you in my life is unbearable. I'm asking because you're not just my wife. You're my heart, my soul, my everything. You're the love story I never thought I deserved. The happy ending I never believed could be mine. His voice broke slightly with emotion, and Decca could see tears in his eyes too. Will you marry me again, Decca? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales are real, that true love exists, that some stories really do have the most beautiful endings? Yes, she whispered, then louder, her voice ringing with joy. Yes, of course, yes. 1,000 times yes. The ballroom exploded in applause as Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. This wasn't the careful, controlled kiss of their previous public appearances. This was passionate, desperate, real. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Richard kept the microphone close. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his arm around Decca's waist, "I'd like you to meet my wife, not just in name, but in every way that matters. She's the creative genius behind Whedon Designs, the most talented fashion designer of her generation, and the love of my life. She's the woman who taught me that love stories aren't just for fairy tales. They're for people brave enough to fight." And for them, the crowd surged forward with congratulations, but the orchestra began playing at that moment. The same song from their original wedding, but this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like joy, like celebration, like love triumphant. "Dance with me," Richard said, leading her onto the dance floor that had been cleared by some unseen signal. As they swayed together in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the cream of New York society, Decca felt like she was living in a dream. The emerald ring caught the light magnificently, but it was nothing compared to the light in Richard's eyes as he looked down at her. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Since the morning after our first night together," he admitted, spinning her gently. "I wanted everyone to know that Richard Bance is completely, hopelessly, eternally in love with his wife. I wanted to give you the proposal you deserved, the declaration you should have had from the beginning." "Mission accomplished," she said, holding up her hand to admire the emerald ring. "This is beautiful, by the way. Emerald for new beginnings," Richard explained, bringing her hand to his lips. "And because it matches your gown, and because green is the color of life, growth, hope. Everything you've brought into my world." Other couples began joining them on the dance floor, but Decca barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to this man, this moment, this perfect expression of love. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate declaration. "I love you too," he replied, and now everyone knows it. As the evening continued, their love story became the talk of the gala. Photographers captured every smile, every touch, every look between them. Society reporters scrambled to update their stories, trying to capture the magic of what they'd just witnessed. By morning, their love story would be front-page news, but neither Richard nor Decca cared about that. They spent the rest of the evening floating on air, accepting congratulations, dancing to song after song, stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, but people were looking. Everyone was looking at the couple who had somehow transformed a business arrangement into the love story of the century. "You know," Dante said during one of their brief conversations between dances, "I've known Richard for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. You've performed a miracle, Decca." "We've performed a miracle," she corrected, looking at her husband as he spoke with a group of business associates, his face animated with happiness. "Love is always a two-person miracle." As the evening wound down, Richard and Decca found themselves on the museum's rooftop terrace, stealing a few moments alone under the stars. The city sparkled below them, and the night air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of the roses from the garden below. "Any regrets?" Richard asked softly, pulling her close against his side. "Only one," she said, looking up at him with sparkling eyes. "What's that?" "That it took us so long to get here." She smiled, radiant in the moonlight. "But maybe we needed those 3 years to become the people who could love each other this completely." "Maybe we did," Richard agreed, spinning her slowly under the stars. "But we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As they danced on the empty terrace, with the city spread out below them and the stars shining above, both Richard and Decca knew that tonight had changed everything. Their private love had become public legend, their careful facade had been replaced by joyous truth, and their story had officially become the kind that people would talk about for years to come. They had started the evening as a married couple, learning to love each other. They ended it as the most romantic love story New York society had ever witnessed. Proof that true love, when it finally blooms, is the most beautiful force in the world. And as they made their way home in the early hours of the morning, Decca's emerald ring catching the first light of dawn, both of them knew that their real fairy tale was just beginning. Chapter 10. Forever starts now. 1 year later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Richard's private office as Decca settled into the leather chair across from his desk, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on the gentle curve of her growing belly. At 5 months, pregnant, she had that radiant glow that made Richard stop whatever he was doing just to stare at her in wonder. "The Times wants to do a follow-up feature on us," she said, holding up the email on her tablet. "Anniversary of the most romantic proposal in New York society history." She laughed, shaking her head. "I still can't believe they're calling it that." Richard looked up from the architectural plans spread across his desk. Blueprints for the new Whedon Design flagship store they were opening in Soho, and smiled. "Are you surprised? You had half the ballroom in tears that night." "I had myself in tears," Decca admitted. "I'm still not sure how you managed to keep it secret for so long." Careful planning and a very loyal assistant. Richard stood and moved around the desk, perching on the edge so he could reach out and touch her face. "Though I think Ophelia was ready to burst from keeping the secret." "Speaking of secrets," Decca said, catching his hand and intertwining their fingers, "Dr. Martinez called this morning. She has the results from the ultrasound." Richard's eyes immediately dropped to her belly, his free hand moving to rest beside hers. "And she'll tell us at next week's appointment." Decca's smile was mischievous, "But I may have convinced her to put the information in a sealed envelope." "Decca Banks, you are trouble," Richard said, but his voice was full of adoration. "Mrs. Bance to you," she corrected playfully, holding up her left hand where both her wedding ring and her emerald engagement ring caught the morning light. "And yes, I am trouble, but I'm your trouble. Forever and always," he agreed, leaning down to kiss her softly. Their moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Tempest Blake entered without waiting for permission, her arms full of fabric samples and her expression bright with excitement. "Sorry to interrupt the love fest, but we need to make final decisions about your vow renewal dress," she announced, spreading silk and lace across the conference table. "The ceremony is in 6 weeks, and we still haven't settled on the neckline." Decca groaned dramatically. "I keep telling you, I'll be 6 months pregnant by then. Any dress you make is going to look like a tent." "Any dress I make is going to look like perfection," Tempest corrected firmly. "You're glowing, your skin is flawless, and pregnancy has only made you more beautiful. We're going to create something that celebrates every gorgeous inch of you." Richard's hands settled possessively on Decca's shoulders. "She's right, you know. You've never been more beautiful than you are right now, carrying our child." The reverence in his voice made Decca's heart flutter. Richard had been amazingly attentive throughout her pregnancy, treating her like spun glass, while simultaneously worshipping her changing body with an intensity that left her breathless. "Have you decided on the venue?" Tempest asked, pulling out a sketch pad. "The garden here at the estate," Richard answered. "The same place we took our wedding photos 3 years ago. It seems fitting to renew our vows where we first pretended to be happy." "We weren't pretending that day," Decker said softly. "We just didn't know it yet." Richard's smile was tender. "No, we didn't, but we know it now." "What about the guest list?" Tempest continued, ever practical. "Small," Decker said firmly. "Just family and close friends. Your parents, Dante and Elena, Dr. Winters, Ophelia." She paused, glancing at Richard. "And Aretha, if she's well enough to travel." Richard's relationship with his mother had been slowly, carefully rebuilt over the past year. It would never be the relationship they might have had if she'd never left, but it was real, honest, and healing for both of them. Aretha had been overjoyed when they'd told her about the pregnancy, crying tears of happiness at the thought of being a grandmother. "She'll be there," Richard said confidently. "She wouldn't miss the chance to see her son marry the love of his life for real this time." "Speaking of the love of your life," Tempest said with a grin, "Vogue confirmed they want Decker on the cover of their September issue. Fashion's first family, how love transformed an empire." Decker's mouth fell open. "The September issue? But that's the most important issue of the year," Richard finished, his pride evident. "And you're going to be perfect on that cover." "We're going to be on that cover," Decker corrected. "They want both of us, the power couple who chose love over everything else." Richard's laugh was rich and warm. "From strangers living in the same house to the cover of Vogue. What a journey we've taken, and we're just getting started," Decker said, her hand moving to her belly again. "This little one is going to grow up in a house full of love, with parents who know how precious this all is." "Speaking of this little one," Tempest said, reaching into her bag, "I brought something." She pulled out a small white envelope. "Dr. Martinez asked me to deliver this personally." Decker's eyes widened. "She told you?" "I may have charmed it out." "Of her," Tempest admitted with a grin. "But the envelope is sealed. The decision to open it is entirely yours." Richard and Decker stared at the envelope as if it might explode. Inside was the answer to the question that had been consuming them both, boy or girl, the child who would complete their family. "Do we want to know?" Richard asked softly. "I don't know," Decker admitted. "Part of me wants the surprise, but part of me is dying to start planning the nursery properly." "We could wait," Richard suggested. "Save it for the vow renewal ceremony. Open it together as part of our new beginning." Decker's eyes lit up. "Like a wedding present to ourselves." "Exactly." Tempest shook her head in amazement. "You two are sickeningly romantic. It's disgusting how perfect you are together." "We're not perfect," Richard said, his arms sliding around Decker from behind. "We're just perfect for each other." "That's even worse," Tempest groaned, but her smile was fond. "Fine, I'll leave you two to your gross happiness. But Decker, I need a decision on the dress by Friday." After Tempest left, Richard and Decker found themselves alone in the office that had become their shared workspace. The portrait Dante had commissioned and hung on the wall, Decker in a flowing blue gown, her smile radiant and her eyes full of the love she'd never been allowed to express. "Do you remember the first time you came to this office?" Richard asked, following her gaze to the portrait. "Of course." "I was terrified and trying not to show it. You were this intimidating CEO in your $1,000 suit, and I was just a girl, with big dreams and no money to make them come true." "You were magnificent," Richard corrected. "Fierce and proud and so beautiful I could barely think straight. I knew that day that you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how completely." Decker turned in his arms, her hands sliding up to cup his face. I love our life, Richard. I love our work, our friends, our family. I love the way you look at me like I'm the most precious thing in your world. You are the most precious thing in my world, he said simply. You and our baby. Show me, she whispered, and the familiar heat flared between them. Richard's hands moved to the zipper of her dress, his touch reverent as he slowly revealed the body that had changed so beautifully over the past months. When the fabric pooled at her feet, he stepped back to look at her, his grey eyes dark with love and desire. You're incredible, he breathed, his hands skimming over her curves. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, Decker corrected, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of promises and forever. As he lifted her carefully, carrying her to the leather sofa by the windows, Decker marveled at how naturally they moved together now. Gone was the careful distance, the fear of too much feeling. In its place was this beautiful confidence, this absolute certainty that they belonged to each other completely. I love you, Richard murmured against her throat as he worshipped her with hands and mouth, treating her pregnant body like the miracle. It was, I love you too, she gasped, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. Forever, Richard. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, he agreed, and as they came together in the afternoon sunlight, both their hearts were full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Later, as they lay entwined on the sofa, Decker traced lazy patterns on Richard's chest, while he stroked her hair. Do you ever regret the time we lost? She asked softly. Never, Richard said without hesitation, because every moment of pain led us here. Every day of separation made this reunion sweeter. We needed those 3 years to become the people who could love each other properly. And now we have the rest of our lives to love each other completely. Richard's hand moved to rest on her belly, where their child grew safe and cherished. Now we have forever. As the sun set over the gardens where they would soon renew their vows, as their baby moved gently beneath their joined hands, Decker knew that their true love story was indeed just beginning. They had survived distance and fear, pain and healing, and emerged stronger, more connected, more in love than ever. Forever begins now, she whispered, and Richard's answering smile was pure joy. Forever begins now, he agreed, sealing the promise, with a kiss that tasted of hope, love, and all the magnificent tomorrows yet to come. And in that perfect moment, surrounded by love and light, and the promise of new life, Mr. and Mrs. Bance began the next chapter of their extraordinary love story. One that would last for all the days of their lives and beyond.